Welcome, honorable members.
Chair, you are on mute, Chair. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Thanks very much. Welcome, honorable members, Minister, Deputy Minister, DG. Oh, there's too much noise in the background. Can we make sure that all the time, unless if we are speaking, we mute our videos and our microphones?
Yeah.
Please. Okay. You are welcome, honorable members of the 4 committees on appropriations and finance. Welcome the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Minister, the DG, officials from Treasury. Welcome the Commissioner of SARS, PBO, all other entities that might be present in the meeting. Hey, mute. Who's muting me? Hey, Luawalu and Alan, what's happening today?
No, it's you, Chair. You don't want to chair this meeting. Don't mute yourself, Chair.
It's you. Don't bewitch my system from Eastern Cape.
Witchcraft ke boss ko Limpopo, ko Limpopo.
Re-transfer it to Eastern Cape.
That is Jewish.
All right. Okay.
South Africa.
Today's briefing is from the Minister on the 2020 MTBPS. The meeting is officially open. All are welcome. Apologies, Honorable Buthelezi might join us a bit later. He was flying from Cape Town to Johannesburg. I see the other Buthelezi. Is the NCOP who's on the platform? Okay. Other apologies, secretaries?
Chair, it's Alan from the Standing Committee on Finance. The only apology is from Mr. Hill Lewis, and that's it.
I'm Chair from Select Committee on Finance. We do not have any apology. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. From Standing Committee on Appropriations, we have 3 apologies from Mr. Matafa, Ms. Dikhale, and Mr. Shekima. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks very much.
Afternoon, Chair. From the Select Committee on Appropriations, we have 2 apologies, Chairperson, Mr. Molezane and Honorable Mama Rakhane, Chair. Chairperson, I forgot to brief you before we start the meeting. We also invited provinces, so there are some chairpersons who have already joined, but I have 2 apologies from the chairperson of the PC on Finance from Mpumalanga and Western Cape chairperson. I saw Honorable Mbesi is on the platform already, so others, they will join during the course of the meeting.
Oh, okay. Welcome, chairpersons of finance committees in provincial legislatures. You are all welcome. Then, yes, Comrade Joe. And then we are done with the apologies. Minister.
Chairperson, can I just come in for 1 second?
Oh, Comrade Yunus.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think you might know, I informed you that we have a provincial week, which was set a long time ago, so we couldn't change it when the MTBPS date changed. So some members have indicated from the finance side, which is also the appropriation side, they may have to leave at 2 o'clock. because they're linking up with their provincial visits virtually. Myself also, I'm going to link up with Utugela District Municipality. So I might slip out at about 2:15, so I'll stay till just around that time, possibly longer if I can. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks very much, Comrade Karim.
That apology will include me, Chair.
Comrade Digeled.
Modula Stulo. Apology, Honorable Kosi Karim. In Yantlama, Provincial Week. I'm at Governing Big.
Okay.
So, yeah.
No problem.
I'm equally going to say that, Chair, because my apology has not been read as yet. My office have sent the apologies to the office there. We're joining the NCOP in the visiting of the railway lines in Gauteng as part of the NCOP week. So I'll be leaving at about 1:30. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we'll try to move faster so that maybe by the time we finish the meeting, all of us will still be in the platform. Let me right away invite the Minister to come on item 3 to brief the joint committees on the 2020 MTBPS. Minister, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And given the fact that a number of colleagues will leave early, maybe I should just cut to the chase. We have a choreography here, which will be the DG and the other relevant senior officials, but I'll ask them to be very brief. Just go to the key issues that we're dealing with. I'll say a few words and then I'll hand over to DG. But I thought, Chair, to ask you, if I may, for us to observe a very short moment of silence in remembrance of Mr. Daniel Plakis, who was the chair of the FFC that you interacted quite significantly with. Correct. He has since passed away, as you might be aware. So if I could request that maybe you allow the committee to have a moment of silence in remembrance of, if that's okay with you.
No, it's okay. Can we observe a moment of silence, comrades and colleagues? May the soul of Professor Daniel Plakis rest in eternal peace. Thanks.
Amen.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Amen.
Oh, that's shocking, Chair.
Yeah, it is shocking, yes. Honorable members, we're going to be very brief in our submission. All of you were in the house, either in person or via the technology system. Basically, we submitted the relevant documentation as usual. We then presented the medium-term fiscal strategy. But more importantly, and that's the important thing of all other things that we said, is the fiscal framework. That's the most important thing, beyond the poetry and the biblical quotes and so on. It is that fiscal strategy that you recall, framework rather. You recall that in June, we came to you with an active scenario in which we wanted to stabilize debt within 3 years. Subsequent debates and discussions in cabinet, in NEDLEC, and so on, led to a situation where we eventually reached a consensus that we should have a 5-year scenario. But the 5-year scenario stabilizes debt at about 95% of GDP, debt to GDP ratio, at 95%. So we think we're now in the danger zone, because any slippage that might happen will easily lead us towards the 100% mark, or even greater than 100%, which means the debt to GDP will be greater than, the debt will be greater than the GDP. So the numerator will be greater than the denominator. So, and that's a very important part of the story. The second issue is that the debt servicing costs are rising, which is something that we should be very careful and aware of, and be able to manage it. The other takeaway is that for us to fund the business rescue plan for SAA, we had to scramble around and take monies from different votes in order to have the 10.5 billion rand for the business rescue for SAA. The press statement that came out of DPE this morning is misleading South Africans. It's not correct. But be that as it may, the 10.5 billion had to be found, and we had to find it in different departments. Unfortunately, the larger burden of that fell on the police, I think, in education probably, but the colleagues will let us know. So the fiscal deficit still around the 15.7% thereabout. Again, you'll see from the table on the fiscal framework. Basically, that's the story, really. Slower growth, contraction in GDP to about slightly greater than 7%, slower tax collection. Now we estimate that tax revenue will decline by an additional 8.7 billion thereabout, to about 322 billion, but you'll see the exact figures. The debt to GDP ratio, as I say, because of the 5-year scenario, now rising to about 95% of GDP. The debt servicing costs being a major problem that we have to deal with, and the funding for SAA. So now, if we've got time, those members who will be remaining, I could discuss a little bit with you the crisis facing the water boards in South Africa. It's not part of the medium-term budget statement, but I think you need to know about it. Because very soon we're going to have major water issues in municipalities. But that's a separate matter I'd like to just brief you about. On that basis, having said that, Chair, could I hand over to DG Dondo to carry on with our choreography, please? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ministers. Minister, good morning, Honourable Member of Parliament. Good morning, Chair, and good morning, other chairs. Thank you very much, Minister. You took as part of our choreography, you took some of my points, but let me summarize what we're saying as follows. There are 3 points that we're essentially lifting in the budget that we presented yesterday. One is that this budget is about saving lives generally. So we are making some, we are providing resources and ensuring that through the adjustments budget process and finalizing that so that then it becomes process in law where we're providing a massive health responses. We are also increasing services, frontline services as well. And the last point is that we are relieving some relief, providing some relief to households and businesses, and obviously confirming that, and obviously confirming the amounts that increase the 350 rands grants by 3 months. So there's that set of issues around our interventions as a result of the pandemic. So we are going into detail in terms of what we said and some of the obvious things that you know. Secondly, which is again the pillar of what this budget is about, we are crystallizing the economic and recovery plan and actually saying you know, what needs to happen, re-emphasizing the critical areas that we need to be doing in order to ensure that we have to make interventions. And in that way, we are confirming and actually you know, thanking the social partners in business, labor, and civil society for having engaged us to actually finalize this plan. This plan is about boosting confidence and investment, about reforms that needs to be unlocked for sustained higher growth, about short-term interventions around electricity generation in digital spectrum, you know, allocation, employment, and rapid industrialization, and also about the implementation of you know, other reforms around modernizing network industries. We've been saying this, reducing barriers to entry, increasing regional and integration and trade. So broadly, there are areas around what this plan is all about and that we need to firm up. The final point number 3 around what this budget was saying yesterday, we want to confirm and ensure the stability of public finances through showing a 5-year fiscal consolidation program, as the minister said, ensuring that the budget deficit is narrowed. And as part of the fiscal consolidation, we're also lifting the issue about wages, the wage bill in particular, and also talking about the tax environment, that clearly the tax is, you know, continues to disappoint in terms of what we are able to collect. And we are in this saying that as part of the fiscal you know, challenges and issues, we are saying the revenue collection is down by almost 300%. And our ability and capability to ensure that we service our debt is an issue that we're lifting, because we are saying here that we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we are not able to pay and we get in a situation where we default on debt. So yeah, those 3 areas are essentially a summary of what we are saying. And when we say that in many words, we say that in more detail in terms of the interventions that we need to be making in various sectors. Minister and Chair, I will leave it at that and ask Edgar quickly, and as Minister said, the presentation was made in Parliament yesterday, to quickly just go through some of the key salient slides that will actually have to bring the points that Minister and I have raised, Edgar, and leave them for the committees to pick up these issues that are critical for this medium-term budget policy statement. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, Minister. Honorable Chairman and members of the committee. I will cover quickly the macro fiscal outlook, and then my colleague at the end, Tsepiso Mwahloli, will cover the borrowing and financing. We can move on to the next slide, because this has been covered by, the overview has been covered by Minister and DG. Thank you. So South Africa, as members will be aware, entered the current crisis already in a weak macroeconomic position. As you can see at the bottom of this table, South Africa's economic growth performance for the last couple of years was fairly weak, and the crisis, of course, hit, and that caused a massive contraction. The global economy, of course, is going through a contraction, projected at 4.4% this year, but a significant recovery is projected next year, with global growth projected at 5.2%. Emerging market and developing countries will be the main drivers of this growth, with countries such as China and India growing above 8% projected next year. For sub-Saharan Africa, growth will be just over 3%. In South Africa this year, we are now projecting, having projected a contraction of 7.2% in June, we are now projecting a contraction of 7.8%. But with strong base effects, we are projecting that will rebound into a growth of 3.3% in 2021. Next slide. In the next slide, slide number slide number 3. It just outlines the domestic outlook. In particular, we provide a breakdown of the macroeconomic projections. What I would call your attention to in this regard is firstly, in the highlighted section of the table that you see in front of you, the size of South Africa's economy. We often talk about growth rates, but the size of South Africa's economy, as you can see in 2019, at current prices, our economy was just over 5 trillion rands. This year, we project the economy will shrink to just over 4.8 trillion rand, as you can see in the highlighted section, before recovering again over the medium term. We consider that inflation will remain very much anchored along the midpoint of the target band of 3 to 6% over the medium term. We're still projecting that investment levels will have some weakness next year, but will be much stronger than it is this year as the economy recovers, and of course as restrictions on economic activity continue to produce positive results. Nevertheless, there are significant downside risks to these forecasts. In the main, a second wave of COVID-19 infections, and should we have another set of lockdowns, we're seeing lockdowns being reinstated in several parts of Europe. Should we have another lockdown, that would of course have a very substantial negative impact on the economy. At this point, we're not projecting that, but should that happen, that would of course place significant downside pressure on economic activity. Next slide. The slide number 4, this next slide, I'm not going to spend time on it because members will be aware of the fiscal relief package and its shape, because it was passed by Parliament. So this information should very much be in the ambit of members, so I won't go through it. I would go to the next slide, and slide number 5, which reflects on the economic recovery plan. Both the minister and the DG also touched on this. I would say just 2 things here. The first is around the fact that we consider that economic reforms are a key part of addressing both our overall economic challenges of low growth, low economic activity, and low long-run economic output, including as it pertains to the job market. We also want to indicate the fact that, as Minister outlined in some detail yesterday, the operation of Vulindlela is being operationalized as part of government's effort to make sure that implementation of the recovery plan actually happens. Next slide, slide number 6. Here we reflect on the revised revenue projections for the current year. Members will recall that we were projecting revenue shortfall of 304 billion rands in the current year. We're projecting that the revenue shortfall will be 312.8 billion rands in the current financial year. But there will be a recovery next year, but we will still have some weakness compared to budget 2020. But as you can see in 2021, in the second column, and in 2022, 23, and 23, 24, we are projecting the estimates that you see there from 1.1 trillion this year, rising to 1.5 trillion, or around 25% of GDP over the medium term. Thank you. Next slide. In this slide, slide number 7, we reflect part of what the minister was referring to around our the risks pertaining to our debt trajectory. But we also wanted to to indicate to the committees, on the left-hand side, we show over the last decade, really graphically, the story that we've been telling for some time, which is that South Africa has been on a very expansionary fiscal trajectory for about a decade. And we sit somewhere in the middle in terms of our expansionary picture. So the primary balance, which has been in deficit for some time, shows that South Africa has had quite an expansionary fiscal stance for some time. So the narrative around austerity does not hold true in the numbers. The numbers actually show that South Africa has been expansionary for some time. And the result of that is shown in the right-hand side graph, which shows that our projected 3-year increase in debt, the debt levels of government are certainly very high compared to our peers in emerging markets as well as other developing countries. And so our fiscal distress situation is quite significant. We are seeing fiscal distress mounting across the developing world. In our case, we are in particular losing ground and need to take measures to arrest what is an unsustainable buildup of public debt. Next slide. In the same vein, in this slide number 8, we indicate the growing risks over the last number of years, particularly the last half decade, where interest payments consuming and crowding out, consuming more of public resources and crowding out an increasing amount of government spending. Debt service costs are now just under 5% the size of the economy, an increase from 3.3% in 2016, 2017. It's also important to understand that we need to, as part of addressing this challenge, to start addressing the decline in infrastructure investment by the state. And so in that regard, stabilizing the fiscus requires both the fiscal consolidation overall, but also a shift in the composition of expenditure. Next slide. In slide number 9 are steps to reduce the significant fiscal imbalances that we're living with and stabilize the debt to GDP ratio over 5 years are outlined. What we are proposing is that compared or relative to the 2020 budget, main budget non-interest expenditure should be reduced by 60 billion rands next year, 90 billion the following year, and 150 billion the year thereafter, and then maintain some constraints on the spending growth in the following 2 years. The largest of these reductions would fall on compensation, and then we would allow, or rather we would push for a growth in capital spending and a protection in the infrastructure grant. In addition to the spending reductions, we propose tax increases of 5 billion next year, 10 billion the following year, and 10 billion thereafter, as well as 15 billion beyond the MTF. This will allow us to achieve a primary budget surplus by 2025-26, and this is expected to result in debt stabilizing at 95.3% in the same year. Next slide. This slide, slide number 10, shows on the left-hand side how we are closing that fiscal gap gradually over the MTF. And on the right-hand side, it shows how, having spiked in the current year, we begin to reduce the primary deficit over the MTEF. Next slide, slide number 11. In slide number 11, then, we show the debt outlook, the gross loan debt of government. As you can see in the dotted line, firstly, we are projecting this record amount of debt of 81% or just under 4 trillion rand, 81.8% GDP, or just under 4 trillion rands. This will rise to 95.3% of GDP in 2025-26, and then we begin to bring it down again. And so that is the stabilization point for public debt. Next slide. The fiscal framework that achieves this outcome is shown here in this in the slide that members will be familiar with from the MTBPS document, so I won't spend time on it. And as the minister indicated, the consolidated deficit will narrow from 15.7% this year down to 7.3% in the outer year. Next slide. Slide 13 shows that our fiscal consolidation approach is one that is meant to be target consumption spending in our spending reductions and shifting towards investment spending. And so if you look at this bar chart, you can assets are growing faster than the other items at 7.8% over the MTF. Next slide. Slide number 14 shows reflects on the proposal for reductions in the consumption spending of government weighted towards the public sector wage bill, as reflected in the MTBPS document. In particular, really a guideline that implies a wage freeze for the next 3 years. Next slide. This slide 15 is a reproduction of a slide in the MTBPS that you'll be familiar with, so I won't spend time on it. Next slide, slide 16. Slide 16 tells two stories. It emphasizes the risks we're facing because debt service costs are now the fastest growing item, have been for a while, but continue to be the fastest growing item of expenditure. Nevertheless, it is true that because we are shifting the composition of expenditure towards infrastructure, economic development, and community development are growing at a faster rate item in the budget as part of our efforts to support the economic recovery plan. Next slide, slide 17. This is the division of revenue shown in chapter 4 of the MTBPS, so I won't spend any time on it, except to just say that the division of revenue in percentage shares remain broadly the same as what we've had in the past, except that there is a marginal increase in the shares of provinces and local government. Minister, with your permission, I will hand over to Tsepiso, basically us to an end by talking to the financing and debt management strategy as reflected in this slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Edgar. Good afternoon, members. Thank you to the chairperson and chairpersons of committees as well. The slide 18 shows the financing and the debt management strategy. You would recall when we came in June, we were painting quite a very difficult picture for this year with borrowing requirements over 700 billion rands. They still are slightly improved to 774 as a result of an improvement in the budget deficit. But overall, when you look over the medium term, with a longer stabilization path as opposed to the 3 years that we presented earlier, the financing for the medium term and beyond increases quite a bit, which is going to continue to put pressure in the market for further funding in relation to financing the budget deficit. Just focusing on this year, funding is progressing well. Some instruments are doing better than others. The one that you might be interested in is funding from the international finance institutions. We have so far raised about $5.5 billion against a target of about 7 billion. And it's still work in progress, and we hope that the $2 billion would be raised by the time of the end of the fiscal year. And overall, Minister raised some of the risks that we're seeing going forward, and some of them are around the implications for the debt service cost. With higher debt, the implication is that we'll be paying much more for debt service cost and therefore crowding out other important spend for the government. Key risks going into the medium term would be the consolidation, if it does not realize, as well as the growth reforms that have been articulated. Furthermore, realization of contingent liabilities are going to be quite key in relation to the state-owned companies and as far as it impacts on the fiscal framework. And any other further funding would have a feedback loop again in terms of impacting the debt service cost and also further crowding out of required expenses. So I would stop there, Minister. I think it gives a sense of where we are currently and what the outlooks look like and what the risks are that we need to watch out as we move into the outlook period. Thank you. Over to you, Edgar.
Minister, I think we've got a concluding slide. If the presenter can go to slide number 20, and then I'll basically leave it there because this is basically a summary of what we said in this presentation. So, Mr. Chairman, Minister, I think we will stop there. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
I'm done with the presentation, even from the side of the DG and the Minister.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. We are done on our side.
Okay. Honorable members, let's move to item 4, deliberations. Secretariat, you will assist me in identifying members who would like to ask questions for clarity and make comments.
Chair, it's Alan for now. It's Dion George, Dennis Ryder, and Mr. Isif Tutoy.
Okay.
Mr. Morolong, Chair, the fourth name.
Morolong. Okay. Okay. Over to you, Dr. George.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you for the presentation, Minister, DG, and others. Minister, you've been talking for a while about fiscal anchors. Have you relaxed your previous position on managing the deficit? Because if you look at the numbers, there is no more space for borrowing. You're already crowding out basic services. That's my first question. Then, why have you, Minister, bailed out SAA again? Why not sell it or get a private partner? How can you justify spending money on an airline that you must get from basic services that won't be delivered, obviously, to the most vulnerable? You mentioned education and you mentioned policing. How do you justify that? Then the third question, you mentioned freezing salaries in the public sector and elsewhere. Do the unions and other bodies agree? And then finally, under Operation Vulindlela, structural reforms are mentioned. You know, we know that government can't create jobs. Why is there no action to accelerate entrepreneurial activity? Government seems fixated on infrastructure and being in the center of job creation, and that obviously does not work. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thanks, Dr. George. Honorable Ryder.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Thank you, Minister, and to the team from Treasury. Appreciated. Minister, I'll be reasonably brief. Mr. Sishi commented on the possible future lockdowns and the impact that that may have on the economy and our path going forward. You mentioned last time to this joint committee that you had lost the battle in cabinet. Can you give us any indications of how the battles are going in cabinet these days in terms of the outlook for future hard lockdowns and the impact that they may have on the economy? We did have the president say that there's not a return to level 3 imminently planned, but he didn't commit anywhere beyond imminent plans. So if you can just tell us how the battles or how the discussions are going on at a cabinet level. The next question I have, Chair, thank you, just related to the debt trajectory, which showed an easing off of the trajectory in the medium term. Certainly, I presume, as Dr. George pointed out, because we're just not going to be allowed to borrow anymore. But that indicates that the developmental state agenda is going to have to take a little bit of the back seat. And as I mentioned the other day in my response to the president's speech, that we're moving from developmental state to survival state. However, it's quite concerning to me when I sit in other committee meetings where ministers are telling us that they are not going to abandon their developmental agendas and will continue spending, which is going to cause further pressure on the budget deficit. So can you just tell us, Minister, in terms of the zero-based budgeting, has zero-based budgeting been abandoned? Has the message gone out to your colleagues in cabinet that we need to relook at our projects and need to focus on survival? The last question really relates around DORA and just around spending, where people are feeling it and needing it the most at the moment. I note that there's not a major amendment to the bottom line figure. Are there a lot of violence or movements between budget line items still addressing the COVID-19 response, or are we moving towards business back as usual? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Ryder. Honorable Du Toit.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Minister, thank you for the presentation. I'm not going to elaborate on SAA. I do, however, have a concern with regards to the funds that's been taken away from education, and the President had indicated that 200,000 educational positions will be created in the educational sector. My question is, how will this be funded, Minister? And then you mentioned that any slipping will be detrimental to the economy. Minister, could you please give us information? Would you agree that pursuing expropriation without compensation could contribute to the slipping? And would you agree that the escalating service delivery protests in the country and the political infighting in municipalities could also contribute to the slipping in the economy? And lastly, what steps are taken to ensure that economies on local level is being stimulated for growth, and that could result in widening the tax base? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Honorable Du Toit. Tate Mrolo.
No, good afternoon to the Minister. Good afternoon to honorable members. I only have 3 questions to ask. Let me apologize for not putting on my video. I'm struggling with connectivity. The first question is, can the Minister provide details on where the proposed tax increases will come from? Which taxation line items are we looking at? To the MTBPS made mention of adjustments to senior public servants' remuneration in order to bring down the cost of the public sector wage bill. Can the Minister elaborate on how such a process would be undertaken and whether there has been any engagement with the PSA on such a process? The last question, Chair, is that to what extent does the Treasury believe that the economic recovery plan presented and announced by the President has been appropriately budgeted for? Thanks.
Honorable Abrams.
Yes, Chair, thank you so much. The National Treasury is indeed appreciated for walking the tightrope and having been able to come up with a plan anyway. Chair, I also have 3 questions. Now, there's talk in the presentations here about revenue projections that will improve over the 3-year term. My question is, will that be the case even though there is a threatening COVID-19 recession? 2, Chair, it will be unfair if we do not ask the minister to please brief us on the crisis that is facing Waterboard. I think it is a kind of briefing that is due to all of us as both members here in Parliament and in the NCOP, as well as National Assembly and provinces, because the issue of water is hitting the communities very hard. Lastly, Chair, I don't know, I might have missed it, but I hear the minister talking about a plan to stabilize debt, which was initially 3 years and now 5 years. Can we get to hear that? Thank you.
Noxie, are you still in the platform?
I'm through. I said thank you, Chair. Sorry.
Funny what the NCOP, you didn't say that, you just
I did, but it was in English. I said it in English, Chair. I understand from Limpopo it's difficult.
All languages here in Limpopo are flexible. Honorable Peace.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to the Minister and the honorable members. Just one question, Chair, that I want maybe to be clarified by the Minister and the DG, is the issue of labor. We know now that knives are out, labor is saying that they don't agree with what the Minister has proposed on the public servant salary bill. I think I just want to ask the Minister whether the Minister, together with the Minister of Public Service and Administration, how are they going to handle this matter with the public sector unions in making sure that we do not have an unnecessary strike that will cost the country dearly during this difficult period of the recession? Thank you very much.
Councillor Comrade Mpisi.
You can see the Chairman.
Thank you. Agbare Okamp.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Honorable Minister, thank you very much for you being here today and addressing us. Honorable Minister, firstly, the situation with the water issues at municipalities, I would like to get more on that as well. In the beginning, when you addressed us today, you said the following, and I quote, "Any slippage may lead us to become 100% of debt of our GDP." In other words, we do not have any room for any failures anymore. We cannot afford any slippages. But yet we see that we are again bailing out a slipping or a failing SAA. We have bailed out ESCOM. We are busy with Land Bank. There are so many state institutions that are continuously slipping, and yet we are keeping on bailing them out. Would our economy be able to afford any more bailouts? I know that in the past we've said that we are not in a position to do any more bailouts, but yet time and again we go on and we do those bailouts. Are we at a point where we as Parliament and as a government must come to a point where we say absolutely no more bailouts? I believe personally that we cannot afford it. I have been covered by Honorable Biden and Dr. George as well with regards to the other issues, but I would like to get your comments on that as well. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson.
Thanks, Honorable Okam. Okay. Over to you, Minister DG and the officials of Treasury and SARS.
Chairperson, can I just raise a question quickly before you do?
Okay.
And,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Chairperson.
Thanks. No, firstly, just two quick points. One is, since 2015, as you know, Chairperson, we've been raising with Treasury, with SARS and so on. And your committee continues to do this, have quarterly, I think it's every 6 months meetings with several other committees and other departments around illicit financial flows. Now, never more has there been a case to say that we need that money. And we've raised this matter repeatedly. I think several of our reports on the budget and MTBPS and so on, our annual reports, have repeatedly raised this about the need for greater cooperation, not just amongst the departments, that's beginning to happen, and the entities like Hawks and FIC and whatever, but also amongst the ministers concerned. And we recommended that while it's not for us, as you remember, Chairperson, as Parliament to prescribe to the President and the Executive what interministerial committees they should set up, and they've got too many anyway, but isn't there a case for an interministerial structure with the Minister of Finance as the head, and notwithstanding his many other responsibilities, to have such a committee? We've never got a reply from the President. We wrote to him some years ago, nor the ministers. They all say yes and nothing happens. So can the current minister tell us where's that process, why they're not doing it, and what they and National Treasury, I see the SARS, I see the commissioners as usual here, are doing about this, and what they're going to do more actively now that we are in the troubles we are, many of which have got nothing to do with us. They're a global pandemic. Secondly, it's just an observation about us, including me, all of us, Comrade Chair, as MPs. So here we are with the biggest crisis over 100 years. It's correct what we are doing, Comrade Chair. We're asking questions and seeking clarity. But underlying our questions, including my own, which is a boring old question, though relevant as it is now, perhaps even not perhaps, in fact, more than ever, it's still an old question. So what is it that we as Parliament, we need to think about as Chairperson? That's a question that should be answered now, but in processing the MTBPS, it's something you, Chair, myself as the Chair on the NCOP side, and two other relevant chairs should be looking at, which is, we keep asking the same sort of question. Why are you bailing out SAA? And the minister will say, I'm not bailing them out, blah, blah, blah. The same issues as that example repeatedly are raised today. But we need to move forward, Comrade Chair. It's not just for the minister and for government to decide the way forward out of the mess we're in. It's for us as Parliament also to think of alternatives where we disagree with the Minister and National Treasury and the government. It's also for us to offer alternatives to them. It's also for us to be realistic about where we are. We're in a new terrain, difficult, turbulent, unpredictable as it is, but we need to be more creative and imaginative and more effective and more decisive, instead of always copying and criticizing the executive. Not that the minister, the department, and the executive are not vulnerable to such criticism. In short, I'm saying, Chairperson, could we in our report this time be more decisive about what it is we think should be done and monitor what we expect the government to do more actively and assiduously? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thanks, Honorable Karim. For now, those are the questions and comments. Over to you, Minister, and your team.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson and members of the committee. The number of members who have asked questions around the South African Airways and whether this is a bailout that we're provided for or not. My answer to the query is that this is not a bailout. And I've asked somebody to send me the breakdown of what the issues are that lead us to the 10.5 billion for SAA. And as soon as I get that, I'll come back to it. But I would like to insist that this is not a bailout. A bailout would have made a huge injection into SAA, which is not in our budget. What's in our budget now are allocations for specific requirements of the business rescue practitioners. And when they're done with their bid, if they decide on the formation of a new airline, they will do that to the extent that that new airline is going to have private enterprise participation, union investment funds, other institutional investments, and so on. It's fine. My understanding, as it is that that new airline that is being thought about will have private investors, probably along the telecom line, structurally, in terms of the issued capital, subscription agreements, independent boards of directors, independent management, and so on, and et cetera, et cetera. That's my understanding, and I might be wrong, but that's my understanding of the situation. So I think we should separate between the business rescue practitioners and the establishment of a new airline. So I think that's what's in my head. And whether we need a new airline or not, really, that's not my lane. And I've been told many times to stay in my lane. So that's not my lane. If you want to discuss the new airline, whatever it is, you'll have to discuss that with Minister Gordhan, because that's not my lane, really. The next big issue that members have raised has to do with the public service wage bill. Let me indicate that we need to approach this matter strategically. As I indicated yesterday in my budget submission, we said that approach the matter strategically. Most of our public civil servants are hardworking people, and they too don't want to burden the country, but that they must not carry the sacrifices alone. All of us must come into the picture: private enterprise, public representatives, the executive, both national, provincial, and local. All of us must take sacrifices in this situation, because we cannot continue as if the situation is the same as was the case before the fiscal crisis that we find ourselves in. So, and I didn't hear members of parliament applauding yesterday when I made the proposal that we should all sacrifice. They were quiet, and yet they should have been the one clapping, saying that at least they're prepared to make a sacrifice, but they didn't want to do that. The last point to make on this is that, sure, we should try and avoid a public servant strike at all costs. We must try and avoid that. But whatever we do, we cannot break the fiscal framework. That we can't do at all, because otherwise we're on a road to on a slippery road, and we're all going to regret it, because there will be nothing for us. Look at what happened in Greece. Look at what happened in Argentina, in Ecuador, and so on. There's an African country as well, which basically is on the verge of default, whose name I'm not allowed to mention in case I get into trouble again. But that's we don't want to be in that situation. And therefore, there are very important strategic conversations which are taking place between the Department of Public Service and Administration and the trade union movement in the public sector. And Minister Mkunu is leading that process. Again, for further details on this, I kick for touch so that I can stay in my lane. That is his lane, and he's going to deal with those issues. Is the economic recovery, the economic reconstruction and recovery program catered for in this medium-term budget statement? Yes, to a large extent, parts of it which have to do with the public sector, with the budgeting process. Yes, I covered there, whether it's public employment activities, whether it's unlocking business opportunities in terms of making the ease of business, and so on. All those things which have been tabulated are there. The economic reconstruction and recovery program is not purely a government-funded program. It is a program to unlock private enterprise as well, to unlock government investments in infrastructure, but also even the infrastructure investment is not just a government infrastructure investment only. It is meant to pull together private enterprise to come into the picture, cooperatives and so on, into a common national consensus how we move the country forward. At the end of the day, we're expecting private enterprise to invest as much as possible, create jobs, and be able to move forward. And it is in that context that the structural reforms which we've been talking about are not just government structural reforms. These are structural reforms in our economy as a whole. And private enterprise is very key to that process of structural reforms. But there are some elements which are large elements concerning government. For example, what is the role of Portnet in unlocking the flow of goods? You know, what are is the tariff level that is being charged by Portnet a correct one to unlock economic development? If not, what structural change should happen in the tariff system at Portnet to make sure that there's flow of goods, that there's no excessive pricing of goods and so on? Very important part of the structural reforms. Another component, of course, of structural economic reforms would be how do we expand the large ports and harbors in South Africa, the Durban Harbour, for example, the East London Harbour, the Kucha, and so on, such that they can handle larger volumes as trade begins to open, in particular with the African continental free trade area, because there will be lots of movements of goods and so on. So we need to get that structural change, extension of Durban Harbour, inviting private enterprise as well to be part of the management of this port. So you'll find that in our conversations with the Banking Association, for example, we would want to encourage them to be more responsive to private enterprise when they come to them for the loan guarantee scheme, for example, so that we can have a proper, serious business restart. Older businesses, but also new businesses, with the funding mechanisms being within the 200 billion loan guarantee scheme. So I'm going to this extreme length to explain that the economic reconstruction and recovery program is not just a government-funded program, but in the main is to unlock opportunities and so on. And one of the sectors, of course, that we were hopeful would make a significant contribution to the recovery process was tourism. And with Germany now seeing a resurgence, France seeing a resurgence of the COVID-19, you know, it's just going to cause a problem for our tourism industry. And God forbid, there should be no second wave in South Africa, because if there is, that tourism thing is dead, and the economic reconstruction and recovery program is going to be found wanting, because most of the things and items there will be negatively affected. Chair, can you hear me? Something is wrong, yeah?
I can hear you, but there's a strange sound on the background. I don't know where it's coming from.
That is strange sound, yeah. Maybe the technicians can look into that.
Secretariat, this sound, where does it come from?
It comes from the minister's side, Chair.
It's okay.
Huh?
Oh,
For me?
Gadget in the
difficult to tell, Chairperson, from my side.
Gadget.
And I've been muted. I don't know what's happening. But anyway, it's not from my side, Chair.
IT, can you assist in muting this strange sound?
But you are communicating something.
But
Second wave, you can see. I win now.
Yes, I ways today. She doesn't want me to see her today. Anyway, the point I was making though. Oh no. Anyway, the point I was making though.
Alan, Kulek, where are IT people? Okay.
Okay, talking to them on the phone.
Okay. No, proceed, Minister. You know, say 80 minutes only.
No, it's not. It's not the cell phone. Okay, I'll just proceed. No, it's not. It's not. It's not the cell phone. It's got nothing to do with the video. The sound comes from their side. To do the video. The point I was making is that we need to see the relationships between government, state-owned enterprises and private enterprise working together, but also
Honorable Chair, I suggest that the minister switch off and switch on again.
He should reboot the...
Yes, the system again.
Okay. Minister. What's happening here? The sound anymore. Okay. Hopefully the minister will be back in a minute.
Yes, I'm admitting him, Chair.
Okay. But you can't detect where the sound come from.
It comes from the minister's side, Chair, because I tried to mute everyone and leave the minister alone, and it still has that sound.
DG, what's happening in the office of the minister?
It's sabotage there.
Hey, how does it happen?
No, Chair, I don't know. I've sent people to go and check.
It should not be that there are people. I hope there are no people who are trying to hack our systems here.
No, Chair. That's the problem of a speaker.
Is the problem of a speaker?
Yes.
Oh, okay, shame. You must just change positions.
change gadgets. So I don't know what is happening now. Anyway, we're always ready. Can the systems organizer please not mute me all the time, please? I was at the point where I was trying to deal with the interrelationships between the different economic agents and players in the process of the economic reconstruction and recovery program. In particular, wanting to remove this sense that the program is a state-funded program. It's not. The state will be part of the process, but the major part is the private enterprise with the role of the trades union movement and community and so on coming into the picture. So that's very, very important because the state does not have the capacity to fund it. Anyway, it can't fund everything. But the key thing is these partnerships creating the confidence levels necessary. You'd have noticed in the speech yesterday, we made reference to a number of the confidence building mechanisms and factors and so on. I don't agree with the notion of an IMC on illicit financial flows. The issues of finance reside with the Minister of Finance, the National Treasury, and as far as the illegal flows of funds are concerned, that is the job of SARS. There's no interministerial committee that can do anything about that. So that I don't agree with. I don't know who took that decision, but it doesn't make sense at all. And I'll never support it myself. I think those are the major issues that I picked up. But DG, can I hand over to you and your colleagues there to pick up any other issue I might have missed? Thank you very much. And DM, you're there as well.
Thanks, Minister. Yeah, there was a question from Honorable Duet about funds from education and where, you know, and there was a question, Minister, also for you about the expropriation without compensation. Mampu will deal with the question on funds, and Momo will deal with a question from Honorable Long of tax, about tax and the issue about tax there. Yeah, and some of the questions were direct, Minister. You've dealt with all of them. I'm trying to see if there's any other question that was. And Mampu will also deal with the zero-based budgeting, a question from Honorable Ryder, and around the question of environments, and Madi Jeng will deal with the question of DORA. Sepiso will deal with the question of debt trajectory and where it's going. Yeah, maybe let's start with Sepiso, Mampo, and then Momo. Thanks, Minister.
Thanks, DG. It was not really a question. I think it was more of a statement around where the trajectory is going, and given the trajectory, you know, what are then the fiscal anchors that we are considering to lower the budget deficit, and also deal with the debt, because at some point, and the honorable member is right, at some point we will not be able to finance the kind of requirements that we are showing, and I reflected that also in the risks that we see in terms of the government funding program. And overall, the implication for the debt service costs that are already, number one, high, and two, already crowding out the necessary expenditure. So Edgar can deal from a fiscal side in terms of what are the consideration. I know we had considered a debt ceiling, and there's work and research that is ongoing around the best way to deal with some of the fiscal anchors and some of the fiscal rules that could arrest this growth, given that the risks are, if you look at all of them, really are stacked on the upside in relation to this fiscal framework. I'll stop there, DG, and Edgar can expand on some of the work that they've done around the fiscal anchors. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks. So very quickly, so we as honorable members, I think, will be aware, we do have an existing fiscal anchor in the form of an expenditure ceiling. You can see the details in that regard in Chapter 3 of the MTBPS, as clearly outlined in RAND terms over the MTF. The issue of additional anchors is something that we've been working on for some time, including a debt ceiling. Of course, an important aspect to understand in that regard is that a fiscal anchor such as a debt ceiling, if it is to work, needs to be backed up by a credible set of policies, including potentially legislation or at least a cabinet decision. But from a technical perspective, we consider that there might be value in it for the long term. But what's more important is to have credibility in the overall fiscal stance, rather than just having a number or an artificial ceiling. But for sure, we have been working on that for some years, actually, in respect of fiscal anchors. But I think for now, I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Chair.
Nampo?
Thank you, DG. I'm just trying to switch on the video. Good afternoon, honorable members. Good afternoon, DG. So the questions that I'm going to be dealing with will be on budget reductions. So far, what we have done is that we have given departments the indicative reductions that they have to consider, but we still have to work with the departments to see which programs they can reduce that will have the minimal impact. I mean, there's no doubt that these budget reductions are of a significant nature, and what it will mean for some departments will mean policy changes or basically improving the way in which they do things. So what we're going to do between now and the budget 2021 will be just to work with these departments to make sure we minimize the impact on service delivery as much as possible. So that's what we're going to do between the next coming few months. In terms of the zero-based budgeting, as the minister has indicated, at the time of the supplementary exam, what we plan to do is that we plan to conclude on the spending reviews, which we have already done, 50 of them, and we did put a box in the MTBPS that just summarizes the outcome of the spending reviews and use that as a tool that will help us get through to the full zero-based budgeting. So the minister has announced that we're going to start looking at the two departments, which is the National Treasury and the DPE. And from there, basically, the starting point would be looking at the spending reviews that we have done in the budget of the Treasury and DPE. And then from there, the recommendations from those, then we will implement it. As the minister said, this process takes long. So for now, we just focusing on the two departments so that we can make sure we learn as we do, so that when we implement to the overall department, at least we have a good idea of what needs to be done and how effective we can do it. So for now, we will continue with the spending reviews for the rest of the departments as we have been, so that when we start going or we start doing zero-based budgeting for those departments, we already have the recommendations from the spending reviews that we have done so far. Thank you, DG. Thank you, honorable members.
Momo on tax illicit flows.
Okay, no, thanks, DG. I think firstly, just on tax, in terms of where revenue will come from or the additional revenue, those decisions we'd only make at budget time. Generally, that's when we make any new tax proposals, except, of course, like you had for COVID in March and April, but otherwise we only do them on budget day. So when we do the MTBPS, we still keep all our options open. We monitor whether we have growth, because obviously there's a trade-off, for example, between growth and depends which tax you, if you were to put up any tax. But at this stage, and I think as was said in the February budget, we're not looking at significant tax increases. The amounts that we've penciled in for next year are still small, and they could happen whether you deal with fiscal drag, so how much you lower certain taxes rather than increasing. But those decisions have not been made as yet. And it's not a big amount for next year. And similarly, as we deal with year 2 and year 3, we'll make those decisions on the budget days when we present the budget on those days. With regard to revenue collections improving, yes, as you can see in our outlook, we are looking at growth, even though it's low, although we expect a bit of a bounce. So revenue should improve if we get even lower growth going. At the moment, remember, we've had negative growth. So we're optimistic. Yes, there are risks. If there's a second wave, if there's a lockdown as we had like this year, yes, that will impact. But I think even if with the second wave, I think that we've learned perhaps how to live better with this virus, and so hopefully it will not be as bleak. I think on illicit flows, I think the minister has made, I think, a good point, because it's often thrown as a term like illicit flows, like it's one item. I think former Chair Karim, or Chair of our NCOP, I think also knows that there's different sources, and one really needs to make sure if it's illicit flows from, for example, the drug trade, you need the policing and other authorities to come in. To the extent that, like the minister has said, with SARS, I think they are taking steps to deal with specific issues. And remember, some of those issues can deal with taxpayer confidentiality. So it's not something they can go and shout about, but it's their ability to actually assess whether there's transfer pricing and that they stop those. Remember that there's other forms of illicit flows, which was the Guptas taking and SOEs taking funds out. That also requires a different mechanism. So there's a lot of work going on all of these things. Yes, there is some coordination between officials, but I think as the minister said, having an interministerial committee would solve problems like that. The issue is really to get each of the authorities to be doing their work where they sit. Thank you, Chair.
Minister, I think we have addressed most of the questions, unless if we missed some. Thank you very much. I don't know if the DM would want to come in.
I thought.
No, I think oh.
Should I go?
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, honourable members. On the question of whether there are any further in-year shifts and adjustments to DORA, there aren't any major allocations other than the allocations that are coming from the Presidential Employment Initiative, which are going to be captured in that, which are being captured in the adjustment DORA. So of the 12.6 billion that is allocated for this initiative, 8.5 billion will flow to provinces to fund the initiatives within the programs that provinces run, like education, health, social development, and transport, in order to create short-term jobs, but that will also assist in service delivery, particularly in the context of COVID. Like in education, they will be looking at education assistance to assist in various things that needs to be done during this COVID times. So any further shifts within the budgets will be seen when provinces also table their own adjustments next month. So the other question relates to the municipalities. What is being done for municipalities to support their economies and some of the concerns around municipalities. Obviously, when we talk about economic activities, those are all anchored within municipal spaces.
And hence the basics that municipalities need to provide remain very, very important in terms of making sure that there is reliable water and energy and roads and waste management, so that then the businesses are able to get these services in an affordable and reliable manner. So that remains a very important basic element that municipalities need to do to ensure that they can attract and retain businesses within their spaces. And a lot of effort is directed towards that. So obviously the issues around the state of their finances, which a lot of those are rising from the issues of poor governance, becomes quite a concern that we are also concerned about, because then they would impact on service delivery. So hence the efforts through the district delivery model that is also trying to support the issues of capacity and extended delivery, but also address the issues of lack of coordination and alignment of government targeting spaces within these municipalities. So I think those are the issues that remain important, including improving planning and capacity to deliver. And that's the important focus that government is focusing on in these municipalities. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, that brings to the end our burden. I know we'll run out of time on this water boards thing. I think I'll have to come back and have a conversation with you about it. Thank you.
Chairperson, can I just come in on one quick issue?
Yes, Chairperson.
Because we can't keep this hanging in the air as committees. We either take it forward or drop it. So in respect of IFFs, the first thing to stress is that it's not an outlandish proposal we had. It came from 5 committees. Finance is obviously key to addressing IFFs, but it also involved the Minerals Committee. They had public hearings with the Trade and Industry Committee, and then the Chief Whip asked us as Finance obviously would involve. So we had several, as you know, quarterly sittings with Justice, because it involves the NPA, the Hawks, so the Police Committee, and so on. Secondly, obviously, Momo, we know what IFFs are by now. We had several discussions, including yourselves and SARS. Thirdly, National Treasury and SARS seems to have changed its tune today. Well, National Treasury has. Previously, you said to us, well, you know, we hand over matters to the police and the Hawks don't take it forward. We engage the Hawks. They said, well, you know, it's passing the buck, it's the NPA and so on. So we brought all these committees together. We encouraged interdepartmental coordination. Since then, that interdepartmental coordination is very much occurring. As you know, Comrade Chair, more than me, you took over this thing as the NA because it's sort of a provincial dynamic. So it's on the agenda. It's not as if it's something new. Previous ministers said, yes, we'll look into it. So if there can't be an IMC because there's too many of them and some of them are ineffective, that's fine. The minister is entitled to his view, but so is Parliament. I don't see why there can't be some coordination if you've got them coordinating anyway, because it's, yes, SARS must play the key role, but so must the FIC, so must the Hawks, so must the NPA. Otherwise, you're not going to get convictions. SARS itself, SARB, the Reserve Bank, came to us and said, we've given 38 cases. About 2.5 years ago, the governor said to us, and only 2 have been acted on, only 2 convictions, one of which wasn't actually on BEPS, in that case, the mining sector, or illicit financial. There's a woman that was found for some other reason because it was easier to convict. So it is a multidisciplinary thing. There's no doubt about that. We can't go backwards now to say it's simply SARS. But finally, we cannot prescribe to the executive. As we said in our reports, we simply think this is the way to go forward. So if an IMC is out, then some other level of coordination, the ministers must hold the respective departments relevant to prosecuting people ultimately, and there's a whole lot of processes before that. Otherwise, it doesn't have the same effect. The officials can meet. That is all we say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Chairperson Karim. I think we'll have to wind down because the National Assembly started 5 minutes ago. Members have to attend, and there are those who are in the provincial week. We'll have to find a way of carrying the discussions forward in the next engagement. Probably when we come back in the next year, Minister, because now our program is very tight, it's packed. We'll have to get a presentation on how, okay, maybe before I do the summary, I see Honorable Dutoy might want to say something so that we can move towards conclusion. Honorable Dutoy. Akbar Dutoy. Alan and Kulak, didn't I see Dutoy raising a hand?
Yes, Chairperson, he did raise his hand. I don't know what happened.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
I know it's covered.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's covered.
Jay, if the Minister could just answer with regards to the effect of expropriation without compensation on the economy, it'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Let me allow the Minister to come in, then I do the closing remarks. Minister, over to you in regard to that question from Akbar Dutoy in regard to expropriation of land without compensation.
May I please do like rugby players do and kick for touch? It's not my lane. It's not in my lane. Thank you.
Okay. We'll discuss it in another platform, Akbar Dutoy. I was saying that when we come back in the new year, 2021, we'll have to get a full presentation on the debt management strategy. Because today we had to deal with the whole MTBPS. But I think when we deal with the budget, the February budget, this matter of debt management strategy will be quite very important. Because as you have alluded to, Minister, that that if it's not properly managed, it can start to crowd service delivery, and that will lead to social unrest in the country. We have to avoid that. So we'll have to create space for briefing on the debt management strategy. And the same applies with the implementation of the economic recovery plan that has been tabled by the president as to how is it going to be implemented. I heard that the president will be heading a task team or in term, I'm not sure what team is it that. We will need a briefing on the actual implementation. Also, Minister, the issue of the public procurement bill. The public procurement bill has been in the pipeline since 2017. And in the MTBPS now, what is reflected is that it will come somewhere in 2021, 2022. We will have to engage on this matter. This bill is a bill which has got lots of interest out there in the public. Stakeholders that engage with us are very interested on this bill. So I think the sooner the bill gets tabled in Parliament, because Treasury has been conducting public hearings, the better. It's a bill that can change the procurement landscape in government and enable lots of players to begin to get empowered through public procurement. So let's discuss that in another platform as to when is this bill coming, because it's quite very important to us as public representatives. Thanks very much, honorable members, Minister, Deputy Minister, SARS Commissioner, DG, and your officials and officials of Parliament. We'll meet again next week on the 3rd of November to continue to discuss, engage on the, is it public hearings, Alan and Gulek, on the 3rd?
Yes, Chair. On Tuesday, the committee is meeting, or in fact, all 4 committees are meeting with the PBO and FFC. And then on Wednesday, it's the standing and select public hearings.
No,
and
let's
then
meet
Friday next week is the response by National Treasury and SAL to submissions.
Okay. Those are the announcements. Thanks very much. The meeting is officially adjourned.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Chairperson, thank you very much.
Realeboa. But what's up,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Akbar. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Oi, Ocampo. Shenge, ukhona lapha?
Ukhona.
Awu, umakhosi